No one clapped when they called my name. The podium echoed. The seats were a sea of polite strangers. I stood there in my cap and gown with a diploma pressed to my chest, and the sudden weight of absence like a stone in my stomach. My name is Elena Marisol Reyes, newly graduated with a degree in clinical psychology. The auditorium smelled of lemon polish and hot carpet. The buzz of cameras clicked like distant insects. 3 days later, I got a text that looked like a math problem and not a message from my parents. Please wire us $1,200 for rent this month. I sent $1 with the note, "Congratulations," and I changed the locks that night. That was the beginning, not the end. This is the story of how I chose a limit and built the proof that made my family face what they had done. The stage lights had left a film of heat on my forehead. I remember the metallic tang of cold water in my mouth and the way the diploma felt heavier than it should. Seats crunched underfoot as the crowd shifted. A young man near me whispered, "Congratulations," and his breath smelled like coffee and peppermint gum. When they announced my name, I smiled and tried to look small and grateful at once. A neighbor in the second row took a photo. I waved, my hand shook. Across the aisle, there were faces turned toward phones, toward other obligations. My older sister Anna had promised to be there. My mother Rosa and my father Carlos had texted photos of their cats instead. A classmate leaned over and said, "You earned this," and his voice was warm and immediate. I answered, "Thank you," and the word echoed, a thin thing. The empty rows felt loud. The ushers clapped politely as if obligation could fill the gap. Later that night, I walked home with my diploma in its thin folder and a postcard of silence tucked into the pocket of my coat. I pressed my palm against the new brass knob and felt the cool ring of the metal, imagining a small lock closing like a sentence. My childhood is a short book of small compromises. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment on Willow Street. My parents, Rosa Martinez Reyes and Carlos Reyes, worked nights and slept mornings, their voices soft in the kitchen at 4 a.m. When I was 12, I emptied my allowance into a jar so my father could fix a transmission. When I was 15, I took a job tutoring and handed the paychecks to my mother because she said the bills were due. In college, I deferred student loans until the interest was unbearable because they insisted they would help. That pattern was a slow carving out of what was mine. I learned to measure love by receipts and promises. There were moments of warmth, too. Anna taught me to braid my hair and told me stories of her first day at work. Ruby Gomez, my friend from community college, lent me a winter coat when my heater broke. Marcus Lee, a neighbor, once fixed my bicycle free of charge and laughed about it. But the ledger kept growing. I paid for groceries and utilities, and I got messages in return that read like invoices. The expectation of payment moved between us like a shadow. It felt obvious and then not. When my acceptance to graduate school arrived, they asked for cash for application fees. When I celebrated milestones, they asked for contributions to their emergencies. I set aside savings in a narrow envelope under my mattress and pretended not to notice the slow emptying. I had been saving for a security deposit on my own place since the summer I turned 22. I did internships, coffee runs, late-night shifts, and every check I received, I folded into envelopes with dates and labels. The day of graduation, I had enough to move into a small apartment with a new lock I could afford to buy and install. When the rent text came, it looked clinical, numbers separated by a comma and no sign-off. The message read, "Need $1,200 by Friday or we are evicted." There was no please, no love, no explanation. I stared at the glowing screen, feeling my chest tighten. I typed back a single emoji and then erased it. I replied with a photo of my diploma and the words, "Congratulations," and sent $1 through an app, a quiet refusal with a thread of irony. That night, I went to a locksmith with cash under my tongue. Diego, who runs the shop on Maple Avenue, smelled of oil and coffee. He replaced the deadbolt while I watched the new metal bite into wood. The click was small but holy. For the first time, my door would only open for me. I slept with the coins I had left like talismans under my pillow. 3 days later, a marked police cruiser appeared at my building. I had called ahead to say I did not want anyone to come, but a welfare check request had been filed. Officer Martinez and Officer Lee knocked, and their shoes squeaked on the linoleum. I opened the door, and the smell of my apartment, lemon cleaner, and old books felt like an answer. Officer Martinez asked, "Is everything okay?" And I said yes, and my voice was firmer than I expected. Officer Lee asked for my ID, and I handed it over, the edges of the plastic cold against my thumb. They asked if I wanted to press charges when I explained the text, and I hesitated because pressing charges sounded like breaking something that might never heal. There were at least 6 exchanges in that hall. "Your parents filed a complaint," said Martinez. "They are worried," said Lee. "I am safe," I replied. "They say you are missing," Martinez countered. "I am not missing." "You look very young to be alone," Lee said. "I am 23, and I graduated last week," I replied. And then I added, "I changed my locks." There was silence long enough to hear the building's old heater click. They took a report and left a thin sheet of paper on my table. The humiliation was a physical thing, a taste of pennies in my mouth, a buzzing in my ears. The report would sit in a file labeled welfare, but it felt like an accusation filed against my independence. The investigation into my finances began because I requested a credit report to protect myself. I sat at a small table with a laptop that warmed my thighs, the screen harsh and white. Transactions unfurled like a map of someone else's life. There were charges in my name for a laptop I had never bought, for a line of credit that had APRs I did not understand, for a phone that rang with recorded messages. I called the bank, and my voice was steady, and then thin. "This is Elena Reyes. My social security number was used," I told the representative, Mr. Thompson, and he placed me on hold. The hold music smelled like old elevator carpet in my head. When he returned, he said, "We can freeze the accounts with your consent," and I consented with every part of my body. I recorded conversations where allowed. I learned the term identity fraud, and the paperwork tasted like bleach. I traced purchases to a card linked to a delivery address 2 blocks from my parents. I called my mother, and she answered with the same flat voice she used for grocery lists. "Elena," she said, "what is this about?" I asked. "We are helping with expenses," she said. I played the voicemail where an automated cashier confirmed a shipment with my name. Her breathing through the phone felt like a match struck in the dark. These discoveries were clinical and personal at once. I filed a complaint with the Consumer Reporting Agency and with the local police. I hired a lawyer, Sarah Bennett, whose office smelled of paper and cedar. She spoke in short, exact sentences and told me the steps: freeze, document, press charges if necessary. A confrontation was arranged at a mid-range diner because it felt public but not theatrical. I invited Anna, my sister, and asked my parents to meet. The place was crowded with the smell of frying oil and sugar, and the vinyl booths squeaked when you sat. I sat on the corner booth, my hands folded, my chest a small, steady drum. At the table arrived my mother, Rosa, my father, Carlos, my sister, Anna, and across the room, Ruby came in late and sat, and Marcus, the neighbor, lingered near the counter. I had warned them all there might be other people there. The conversation began as a negotiation and then became a series of questions that could not. There were at least 9 exchanges between us. "Why would you do this?" I asked. "I needed help," my mother said. "You used my information?" I said. "You gave it," my father replied. "No, I did not," I said. "You signed," my mother insisted. "What I signed was for bills when you asked," I said. "You never asked me about credit lines," I countered. "We thought it was for the family," my father said. "Who decides what the family is?" I asked. "We do," he answered. Ruby leaned forward and said, "This is not okay." And Marcus added, "You cannot treat your daughter like a bank." The manager looked over, the coffee machine hissed, the napkin dispenser clacked. Tears came and were not private. The waitress dropped a stack of plates with a sound like a small crash, and everyone glanced up. Names were called, accusations were leveled, stories collided. The diner smelled of hot sugar and old vinyl, and the light through the window made the dust in the air look like a slow storm. The fallout from that conversation rippled out in text messages, in a voicemail I saved that accused me of ingratitude, and in a silence that cleaved the family. A week after the diner, the bank called, and a representative came to the hall outside the community center where a small graduation party was being held. The party had been planned by friends who wanted to celebrate a milestone that my family would not attend. I heard the tang of paper streamers, and the cake smelled faintly of buttercream and forgetfulness. The bank had traced fraudulent charges and requested a welfare check because someone complained about identity theft, and the address on some documents matched my parents'. Officer Martinez and a man in a Navy suit from the bank arrived. The murmurs at the party turned into a hum, and eyes found me like headlights. The officer approached and said, "We have a report, and we need to ask some questions." My mother stood up, and her face was a particular color of shock and then anger. There were cameras now, phones lifted, the hush of people waiting for a scene. The banker, Mr. Thompson, produced documents, his voice formal and precise. "We have confirmed unauthorized accounts opened with Miss Reyes's social security number," he said. "We can freeze these accounts today." The sound of that word froze the room. Freeze. My sister Anna wept and said, "I did not know." My father tried to speak and could not find the sentence. I said nothing for a moment, and then I said what I had rehearsed. "This is fraud. This is a crime. This is not a family budget." The policeman explained the process, the bank representative listed the steps for remediation, and the accounts were put on hold that afternoon. There was a low crackle of conversation, and then a chorus of clicking phones. My friends came up and hugged me. Their shoulders smelled of perfume and cologne and the adhesive smell of party streamers. The party folded into a different shape. My mother stepped outside, and someone recorded her saying she is overreacting, and that clip circulated faster than any conversation. The public validation had a price. My family was exposed, and the community took sides. The documents that followed were precise. A complaint with the Consumer Protection Agency, a police report number filed at the local precinct, an email from the bank confirming a fraud alert, and a letter from a debt collection agency that had been billing accounts in my name and address. I printed everything and stacked it on my small kitchen table like a deck of evidence. I learned the vocabulary of reclamation: dispute, verification, freeze, fraud alert, block. Sarah Bennett, my lawyer, reviewed pages and told me what to expect. I filled out affidavits and authorized releases. The chronology was slow and precise, and then sudden. 1 month, and my credit report showed a freeze indicator, and calls to collection agencies began to stop. The accounts linked to the fraudulent purchases were closed or frozen pending investigation. The community responded with mixed messages. Some friends sent messages of support and offers to help with paperwork. Some relatives stopped answering. The online post about the incident gathered sympathy and criticism. There were articles in a local newsletter and an opinion piece that called out family boundaries and financial abuse. The repercussion was both legal and social. I felt lighter and rawer at once. If you are watching and something in this resonates, please take a moment to share. I know these situations are painful and complicated. If you have ever had to draw a line with someone you love, write where you are watching from and begin your comment with the sentence, "I changed the locks when." I read every single comment and I respond when I can because your experience matters, and it helps others feel less alone. Tell us the small detail that made you know it was time to say no. Your comment may give someone else the permission to act. This space is meant to hold hard stories and practical steps. After you leave a comment, scroll down for resources and links that will help you freeze accounts, file complaints, and contact local advocates. Sharing helps build a community that recognizes that setting boundaries is not betrayal, but an act of survival. Keep reading to find out how this unfolded into a formal investigation and what the paperwork looked like. The tension after the public exposure had two distinct shapes. The first was a private unraveling that lasted days. My parents stopped calling. Messages went unanswered. They sent a single postcard that read "Love" in a handwriting that no longer matched anything I remembered. The silence felt heavier than any accusation. I went to the precinct to sit in a room with a metal table where a clerk typed slowly. I said. "We are including all documentation," Sarah Bennett said. For 2 paragraphs, I felt a pressure like a slowly tightening band around my ribs, as if breath was something I had to ration. Then a second, sharper pressure arrived when my mother posted on social media an edited version of the story that painted me as a reckless child. That public narrative was a low blow. It hurt because it was not true and because the lie was designed to sway neighbors and friends. I responded by releasing my own statement, with facts, with the bank's letter, with the police report number, and by refusing to engage in back and forth on comment threads. The public exchange felt final. 1 month later, the freeze on my credit profile had held. I had a letter from the bank, stamped and signed, confirming that no new lines could be opened in my name without verified authorization. I had a protective order in process against unauthorized use of my identity, and Sarah Bennett had drafted a suit to recover damages. I had found a new apartment with a brighter window and a lock that clicked like defense. I started a part-time position at a community mental health clinic where my ID was valued and my work felt like soil that could hold something. I filed complaints with the Consumer Protection Agency, and the collector agencies withdrew erroneous claims once presented with documentation. I practiced small rituals of repair. I taped the diploma to my wall and then took it down and carried it into the new apartment. I installed a mail forward and signed up for identity monitoring. My friendships shifted. Ruby and Marcus remained. Anna texted once a week with a small check-in. The community support had costs and benefits. I learned to say the word limit without apology. 3 months out, I had compiled a packet of documents thick enough to be physical proof to hand to anyone who needed to see it. Reports from the police, correspondence with the bank, notarized affidavits, a letter from my landlord confirming the timeline of my move, and a recorded conversation with a collection agency that admitted error. I had started therapy with a clinician who specialized in family dynamics and financial abuse. I could describe the feeling of being used and name it without needing validation. Work had picked up, and I was promoted to a coordinator role that required more responsibility and offered a small raise. My credit showed signs of recovery, and the identity monitoring service alerted me to attempted inquiries that were promptly contested. The social media narrative had calmed. A few people apologized for public comments they had made without facts. Anna began to attend family therapy sessions mediated by a licensed counselor, and the sessions were awkward and sometimes humiliating, but they existed. I learned to eat dinner alone with the radio on and to find peace in small routines like hanging a new curtain that let in a clean light. My name returned to me like a garment reclaimed from a pile. 6 months later, the case had moved from immediate remediation to longer-term accountability. The police investigation had identified several fraudulent actors and forwarded evidence to the prosecutor. The bank had restored certain disputed funds and offered a small settlement for the anxiety and time lost, which I accepted after consultation with Sarah Bennett. The public exposure had had consequences. Family members who had enabled the fraud faced mediation and legal questions they had to answer. I had a written statement from the collection agency confirming error removal from my credit file and a certified mail return receipt that proved delivery. Professionally, I was teaching a workshop at the clinic about boundaries and financial exploitation, and I spoke with a steadier voice than I had 6 months before. The diploma that once felt heavy now sat in a frame on my wall near a keyring with the locksmith's name, Diego, engraved on a tag. The silence that used to bruise now had a gentle quality, like a room left to cool after a storm. I still carried the memory of that graduation day, but it no longer defined my future. This is not a simple victory story because family is complicated and recovery is ongoing. I have documents and proof and a support network and a job that values me. I have limits that feel like new bones. If you need help, take practical steps right now. Freeze your credit, collect documents, file a police report, and consult a consumer rights attorney. If you want more concrete resources, check the description where I list local agencies, sample letters to banks, and links to identity monitoring services. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing for more real cases and guides. Tell me in the comments your town and begin with, I changed the locks when. The silence I once dreaded now keeps me safe. The $1 I sent was small and theatrical, and it told them I would not be a free ATM. The quiet that follows a locked door can be a place to rebuild.